Hi there, class. As you know, we've been going through Module 4, which is Ecosystem Dynamics, where we're looking at how species interact. And that is basically a very important question that we need to ask in science because we are species and we interact with other things on the planet. Now, one way that we have been interacting and influencing the world and other species is that we've been using a lot of resources. These are both non-organic resources like coal and energy, as well as organic resources like food, crops, beef, and all those sorts of things. And they're having an impact on the environment. Now, as we go into our depth study, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in this video, but we're going to be making an investigation into how we can increase the yield or productivity of our resources on this planet. Okay. So, why is this question important? Well, as you know, the world is actually getting bigger. That is, the number of people in the world is growing. And what that means is that puts an increasing strain on our resources. That is, the world only has a certain carrying capacity or a limited amount of resources which can sustain a certain number of people on the planet. Okay, so if there's going to be an increasing number of people and we want all those people to live happily and healthily, we need to increase the amount of food that we're producing. However, the problem is that in a lot of cases, for example, when we're eating plant matter, the yield or the production of our food will be largely independent on how much sunlight is coming in. And we can't really control the amount of sunlight that hits a certain area or the weather. So we need to understand other ways we can increase our food productivity, okay? Because there's a increasing food shortage or crisis. Now, you heard me mention just before about carrying capacity. If you look at this graph behind me, you'll see this red line. Okay, the red line is showing the amount of resources available for a population or a community at their disposal. And if you'll see the other lines, if you see as the population increases, that carrying capacity actually becomes lower to a point where it affects the number of individuals in that population surviving, and eventually it will cause a massive decline or crash in population size. Now, as humans, we are no different. We're using up our resources at an alarming rate, and as scientists, we're predicting that this can't go on. And at some point, there's going to be a catastrophic population crash. What that means is a lot of people are going to potentially die or starve to death. So, when it comes to trying to maximize the yield, the first thing that agriculturalists can do, or scientists in that manner, can say, okay, what's the most number of seeds we can put in a particular area so we don't increase intra-specific competition? Now, you'll remember that intra-specific competition is different to inter-specific competition, in that intra-specific competition is competition between individuals of the same species. Now, this happens in plants as well as animals. So if we were to put, say, 100 seeds into a meter square of field or paddock, we need to know, is that going to increase or set the intra-specific competition at such a high level that it will negatively affect the yield? Now, 100 seeds per square meter might not be much, so we think, oh, okay, let's try and increase it to maybe 200, 300, or maybe 1,000 seeds. The point is, we need to know how many seeds or the density of seeds in a particular area we can sow before we start having negative impacts on the yield. Okay? So this might be different depending on what particular species you're looking at, what environmental conditions they're grown best under. We just need to do some research first. So, for our depth study, we're going to be looking at how we might carry out an investigation or an experiment to test this idea. Like, what is the best yield possible to, what is the best, seed density to increase our yield? Okay, and this comes back to that idea, well, we need to increase our yield because there's going to be more people, and we want to increase our carrying capacity so we don't have world hunger and increased deaths and that sorts of thing. So it's a very important question. All right. But before we start looking at how to design an experiment, the first thing a scientist should always do is look at, well, what have we already know? What have we already found out in the past? So that's what we're going to do. So before we start thinking about particular equipments or standardized variables or how we're actually going to do it, we want you to actually carry out a literature review. Now, this might seem quite tricky, but basically all we want you to do is go online, use your knowledge and your scientific understanding of how to get reliable resources. Now, this doesn't just include Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia can be good as a first starting point, but we want you to use both primary and secondary resources, okay? And we want you to be able to incorporate the knowledge that you find from these databases into your report, which is going to come at the end of the term, okay? But more about that later. Okay, so just start thinking about how you might find this information, and if you have any questions, you can come ask me in class or shoot me an email.